It is overtime here again at Old Favorite Friday, discussing incredible classic beers and giving them the love and the respect that they so rightfully deserve. And this week we do another beer, I think the fourth beer we've done so far, from Weihenstephaner, the world's oldest brewery. And this beer is the Vitus. This is their Weizenbach. This is a beer for Weihenstephaner, who is incredibly old, a relatively new kid on the block. This beer was born in 2007, so coming up on 20 years old, which a lot of us would be our oldest beer possible. This is, like I said, a newer exploration for Weihenstephaner over the last 20 years or so. And this is a really, really nice beer that I absolutely adore because I really got into craft beer around German and Belgian wheat beers. So a lot of my first foray into craft beer, Weihenstephaner Hefeweizen, one of the early craft beers that I had. And this is kind of a jacked up version of a Hefeweizen. It's a 7.7% wheat Bock. The marketing around this beer is so interesting, and it makes me think about my early days in the craft beer industry as I was learning more and more about these classic old world styles and trying to translate them when you're trying to talk with other people about these beers. And Weizenbach doesn't mean anything, right, to the normal beer consumer in the United States, but people might know what a wheat beer is, right? So they term this as a strong wheat beer. It's actually written on the six pack in a couple different areas. Instead of being able to say Weizenbach, if you look at Weihenstephaner's website, you can see that even on the neck label where it has Vitus as the name, here it has Weizenbach on the European version of this bottle, because that is a word that translates, that people know what they're getting there, whereas here, not so much. It reminds me of when I was at Funky Buddha in the very early days, designing the brewery and putting together our first packaging and our first brands, and we had a huge conundrum of how we were going to label Floridian, which is the Hefeweizen for Funky Buddha. They still do to this day. And I was really pushing to use the word Hefeweizen, but there was internal conversation. Does anyone know what a Hefeweizen is? Do we call it a German wheat beer? Do we just call it a wheat beer? If we just call it a wheat beer, are we being disingenuous? And will some people taste it and go, oh, this is a Hefeweizen, and this wasn't what I was looking for. I was looking for an American wheat beer. But it's kind of the marketing that goes into this and trying to kind of cater to people that might not know these beer styles well, so you can give them a chance to actually get into these beers. So I can definitely sympathize with the difference in how to present these beers here. I've obviously dealt with it with that. I've dealt with it here at Barrel of Monks and trying to market our single, which is a Belgian Trappist-style beer, a blonde ale. Well, do we call it a blonde ale? Do we call it a single? Do we call it Patters beer? Another term for that. So it can get really, really complicated. And so, like I said, I respect that. And I love the fact that they're trying to spoon feed us a little bit as Americans and try to get us into some of these complex classic beer styles. But enough about that. Let's talk about this beer in general. I love the Hefeweizen style, which is a German wheat beer with a lot of banana and clove, a little bit of bubblegum. Those are kind of the typical flavor profiles for that. This is kind of like that on steroids. It's a 7.7% beer. That's why they call it a strong wheat beer. So higher than what your typical Hefeweizen is going to be. It has all those great flavors, but I also love, first of all, it's a complex, amazing beer from Weihenstephaner. You're not going to get much better. They know how to make beer very, very well. You cannot go wrong with a Weihenstephaner beer, period, end of story. But talking about this beer in particular, there's this pillowy, wonderful mouthfeel. There's a richness that comes into this beer that sometimes with heavier Hefeweizens gets cloying. It becomes this kind of unpleasant sweetness, the over-the-top nature of like the esters that come off of the German Hefeweizen yeast will take over and just dominate. You'll just get nothing but banana, and you don't get the underlying flavors of the malt and the hops and different aspects. This really is restrained for a 7.7% beer. Drinks much lighter, while giving you more body, more richness, that amazing mouthfeel. But adding on, there's hints of stone fruit in here. I get a little bit of green apple. There's caramel that comes in from the malt. There's some subtle floral hop characteristics that come in on the back end. Honey malt. This is one of those beers that you can sit there and dissect and try over, a couple beers that warm up a little bit, and you're really going to taste something different every single time. This is a beer I discovered maybe 5 years ago, somewhere in there. I think I actually had it at a bar, and I saw a Weihenstephaner beer I had not had before, and I went, wow, I got to give this a shot. And it was just it was right up my alley. I don't drink it enough. I did take a look at it and pull it off the shelf today and said, wow, I can't believe we haven't talked about this beer yet. And we have other beers from Weihenstephaner that are absolutely going to show up here on Old Favorite Friday because, as I said, you can't go wrong with their beers. I think this is a nice beer, especially for those of us who maybe got into wheat beers through hefeweizens, maybe through Belgian wits, and we're used to a more Americanized version of that are a little more one-dimensional, a little bit too sweet, where you kind of graduate to a 7.7% version of a really, really incredible style that is, in my opinion, now underappreciated in the U.S. beer scene. There was a time where every single brewery they launched, they had in their lineup either a white ale, Belgian wheat beer, or they had a Hefeweizen, a German wheat beer. It was almost like it was like a prerequisite. If you open a brewery, you have to do one of those two styles because it was so important. Beers like Blue Moon and Shock Top really got people into those styles, those wheat beer styles, and they pulled people into the craft beer bubble through that. And I think a lot of people took advantage of that and used that beer as kind of their olive branch to get people to drink their new craft beers in the US. And over time, I think a lot of that has kind of tailed off. You've seen a real slowing of sales of wheat beers overall. The American wheat beers then came in and got rid of all those esters and phenols that come off that yeast flavor, and we're really just relying on the wheat malt, which is still delicious. I do love a good American wheat beer when they're well done. But they're just not the staple, I don't feel like, that they have been in years past. And it's really great to have this beer and to be able to say, wow, I remember when breweries were doing these, and this is one that's done so well. And also for those people who are having those beers and still fondly, maybe they still drink them and they finally recall these beers, to have something like this that is just a little bit different, right? It's a little bit more jacked up. It's a little bit richer, a little more flavorful. And I would guess that many people that love craft beer and that are into it maybe have never even had a Weizenbach. So this is a great beer to pick up. Weihenstephaner is relatively well available, at least in South Florida. You can pick up at a lot of specialty places. And if they don't have that, they just have the Heffy, or they have some of their other beers, pick that up too. You're going to be very, very happy. But if you get your hands on Vitus, I highly recommend it, as always. I was just talking about the food pairings that we always do, because food is such an important part of what we do at Barrel of Monks and in just the beer culture in general, in my opinion. There's a place called Moon Thai here in Boca. They make one of my favorite dishes of all time. It's a duck curry. And I like to have it a little bit spicy, as spicy as they'll make it for me. And duck curry, I feel like, would go so well with this. You have all the intense spicy flavors of this Thai curry with the fattiness and the richness of duck. And with this, you add that clove that goes so well with those spicy dishes. You add a little bit of sweetness. You add caramel. You add a little bit of vanilla, some stone fruit. All those flavors complement those so well and really make, I think, some of those spicy flavors pop, and really make even some of the spices in the sauce itself do really well. And it matches up, because this is a little bit heavier of a beer than a traditional Hefeweizen. The fattiness of the duck, this beer at 7.7% can actually stand up to it, where at some other Hefeweizens or Belgian white ales might just not be enough, and the duck might overwhelm it. So it's a specific recommendation, but if you can go to Moon Thai and get the duck curry, it's fantastic. But there's duck curry in other places, and maybe you can make it at home and pick yourself up some Vitus. Guys, thank you as always for joining me. I really appreciate all your recommendations for Old Favorite Friday. Please poke around the channel, give us a like and a subscribe, and see all these great beers that we've been talking about for over 3 years. Barrel of Monks Brewing, we love craft beer, not just our beer. We love the best craft beers in the world, and we just love talking about them. And we'll see you next week. Cheers.